This is the world according to Auntie Jen and Auntie Coco.
Hola. We were just talking about an upcoming trip to Mexico. So yeah. Carolyn's going to practice her Spanish.
This is actually a really good reason for me to practice Spanish.
I would recommend, and they don't pay us. We have no sponsors still. I think we need to be a little more tenacious about that. But Babbel is really good. So
versus Duolingo?
I don't know. I couldn't compare because I have never used Duolingo.
I like Duolingo. Okay. It was fun.
Oh, good. Okay. Well, find what works for you. And then
we do have a sponsor.
Yes. All Shore Seafood is our other best friend's husband's fish company. But All Shores really is incredible. They're located in San Bruno. And if you would like some fresh crab and fish, that's the place you go. Go to All Shore Seafoods. Family owned for 50 years.
Yes, there you go.
Blanca is going to love that. Anyway, we didn't come here to promote amazing fish from our friend's store or talk to you about our upcoming trip to Mexico. We are talking to you today about a philosophy, a practice called disaster capitalism, which is essentially profiting off of people's pain. So, we don't think anyone who's critical of our government or economic system would be surprised to learn that there's such a thing as disaster capitalism, essentially profiting off of tragedy. It's big business in the US. And, disaster capitalism refers to a phenomenon in which businesses, governments, and other entities capitalize on disasters like natural disasters. So we're going to talk a lot about Hurricane Katrina, which was really the blueprint for disaster capitalism, or man-made like wars and economic crisis. So, it's not just to make money. It's also to implement policies and practices that may exacerbate inequality or prioritize profit over public well-being. And so I learned about this way, way back in 2007 when I read Naomi Klein's book, The Shock Doctrine, The Rise of Disaster Capitalism, which is an excellent book. I love Naomi Klein, but that's how I first learned about it. So we're going to break this down for you. And this is something that is advanced by both neoliberals and conservatives alike. So, we're not just going to beat up on the Republicans here, which we love to do, but we're primarily going to beat up on the Republicans because we love to do it and they deserve it. So, Carolyn, were you familiar at all with this before?
No. And I mean, this is like the story of my life right now. And it's a example of my privilege too, that I'm finding as I'm really listening to more things that are upsetting me and they're impacting more people in my life that I love and they're starting to impact me, that I'm going, why didn't I learn about this?
Yeah.
And
well, that's by design.
Well, at 20, I think I could say that.
Yeah.
At 42 or how old am I? I don't know. Yeah. 42. It doesn't matter why I'm doing it now.
We're at the age where we forget our age.
Yeah. So, but I never learned about this in school and through doing a lot of, it's so obvious that what this is. And you look at, it's historically Trail of Tears, Civil War Reconstructionism, the Cold War. I've been watching a documentary on Netflix about the Cold War.
Yeah.
And that's where I first, they didn't say the name, but I think probably if I'd heard that phrase, I think it would make a lot more sense.
Yeah.
And I've been really, it's a weird lack of a better word. It's been fascinating, but also really frustrating to learn about this because it's like, I never learned this in school.
And it's also frustrating to see these patterns repeating themselves.
That's what it is.
Yeah. Like,
because it's so obvious.
Yeah, well, I don't think it's obvious to a lot of folks. Well, and also I think people have really short memories and these things play out in history over and over again. And we act oblivious to the danger,
right?
Like what's happening right now with the Trump administration. Right. We've seen this before. Yes. I posted a picture today on TikTok that a general who works for the National Security Agency posted. It's the Museum of Cryptology. And it's such a dystopian, like Handmaid's Tale picture where on the wall, there's two things that are covered in brown paper bags. And those two things are images of women who were impactful in cryptology. And also, they've covered up the names of Black folks and an Asian dude who also contributed to, and I don't know much about cryptology, but
me neither.
Anyway, but still, it is really disturbing. And this has happened before, and it's happening again. And it's the same thing with disaster capitalism. Yeah. So again, I read the Shock Doctrine in college. I've been a flaming, democratic socialist for a very long time. Carolyn and I used to go to protest together. To protest the Iraq War and the war in Afghanistan. Both were immensely profitable to folks in the George W. Bush administration and the corporations that they were tied to. And that's talked about extensively in the Shock Doctrine too. So Carolyn and I were actually out there protesting this shit. Yay!
It's cute. We should post that picture again.
It's a really good picture. It's one of my favorites. I wish
so tiny.
We were tiny. I wish it were a better quality picture, but it's a good one.
It's so 2001.
Oh yeah. It's perfect. I had like side curtain bangs or some shit. Anyway, not here to talk about my bangs. So let's summarize how disaster capitalism works by looking at an actual example. So we're going to talk about Katrina. Everybody knows how much Jen loves New Orleans. So this really pisses me off for a number of reasons, but don't fuck with my city. So this is from a Guardian article about Hurricane Katrina that Klein actually wrote herself. So New Orleans is really, as I said, the disaster capitalism blueprint designed by our previous vice president, Mike Pence, and by the Heritage Foundation Project.
I've heard about them.
The folks who brought to you who are bringing you 2025. I can't even talk. Really hungover. So the hard right think tank to which Trump has outsourced much of his administration's budgeting. More on this later, guys. So she says, I watched hordes of private military contractors descend on the flooded city to find ways to profit from the disaster, even as thousands of the city's residents, abandoned by their government, were treated like dangerous criminals just for trying to survive. There's something that I show in the racial equity training I used to do. And it's an image of two Black people wading through the water with provisions. Like they have, bread, whatever. And the media characterizes them as looters. And then you see white folks, same exact scenario. And it says people who found food and who are trying to survive. Terrible. Anyway, just an example of how racist the media can be and how responsible they are oftentimes in perpetuating these fucked up racist stereotypes. Anyway, so privatization of the school system, i.e. parents' vouchers to use at private and charter schools, for-profit schools subsidized with tax dollars. That's what these charter schools are. A move perfectly in line with the vision held by Trump's pick for Education Secretary Betsy DeVos. Within the year, the New Orleans school system had become the most privatized in the U.S. So you see these things again playing out over and over again. Bechtel, Floer, Halliburton, Blackwater, CH2M Hill, and Parsons, infamous for their sloppy Iraq work, now arrived in New Orleans. They had a singular vision to prove that the kinds of privatized services they had been providing in Iraq and Afghanistan also had an ongoing domestic market, and to collect no bid contracts totaling $3.4 billion. There's your answer. No bid contracts.
Yeah.
So why were they exempt from the bidding process? Not that I know much about that. I know about it at the city level, at the municipal level. I don't know about it at the federal level.
Well, I hate when I don't know something.
I know. More on that later. Maybe we'll do a TikTok on it. So Richard Baker, at the time, a Republican congressman for Louisiana, declared, "We finally cleaned up public housing in New Orleans. We couldn't do it, but God did." That makes me
These are human
with
beings,
anger, with
children,
and
elderly,
low income people. Like you're treating them like garbage.
Yes.
So in the months after the storm, with New Orleans residents and all their inconvenient options, rich culture and deep attachments out of the way, thousands of public housing units, many of which had sustained minimal storm damage because they were on high ground, were demolished. They were replaced with condos and townhouses priced far outside of the reach of the folks who had lived there. Can't do that in San Francisco. I mean, well, we did have eminent domain in the 60s and the 70s that displaced a lot of Black folks, but right now we don't do that. Terrible. We all have our sins to bear, and government,
Yeah.
Anyway, there's so much more, especially in regard to how taxpayer money was spent to finance private corporations who didn't do shit in NOLA. Contracts awarded to corporations that lack oversight, leading to inefficiency and corruption. So just know that the primary components of disaster capitalism are exploitation of a crisis, profiteering, marginalization of vulnerable populations, and shock as a tool. So the Klein article goes on to say, shock tactics follow a very clear pattern. Wait for a crisis, or even in some instances, as in Chile or Russia, help foment one, declare a moment of what is sometimes called extraordinary politics, suspend some or all democratic norms, what we did following 9/11 with the Patriot Act, and then ram the corporate wish list through as quickly as possible. And that happened with the Patriot Act too. If you think there weren't corporate contracts baked into that shit, you're not
some research.
Yeah, totally. So, and again, I wrote it here and I jumped ahead, but Patriot Act. Anyway, so a couple more examples. So obviously Katrina in 2005, the Iraq War in 2003, where private military contractors like Halliburton and Blackwater profited significantly from reconstruction and security contracts, often with little accountability. There's tons and tons of stories of these mercenaries, these military contractors, like doing terrible things. So COVID-19 pandemic, when we saw pharmaceutical companies and tech firms that saw record profits while many governments implemented austerity measures instead of strengthening public health systems. And then the 2008 financial crisis, which many of us remember fondly. I remember I lost my job. So Carolyn, talk to us about the psychology of disaster capitalism, for lack of a better term.
I need a breath after that. Like, shit. This is exactly what, I'm going to talk about is that, to people, the majority of people, we hear about a crisis happening and we go, oh my God, that's terrible.
Yeah. Unless you're Donald Trump. Right. And a plane crashes and all of a sudden you're blaming DEI.
Yeah. Well, again, a normal human.
Let me reiterate.
A normal human who has empathy. Or you may, the most selfish thing you might think is, I'm glad that wasn't me.
Yeah.
But it could be.
And most of us who have empathy immediately put ourselves in the position of the families who lost these loved ones and think, oh my God, what would I do if that was my husband, my child, my mom?
Right. And there's enough of us to with the LA fires, the first thing I did was contact everyone I knew who was down there and go, are you okay?
Yes.
What can I do? Do you need something? Right. Can I help? This is what normal people do.
Yeah.
But let's examine how human behavior and emotions during disasters enable exploitation. So here's some of the key psychological elements I'm going to talk about. I'm going to list them first. So trauma and vulnerability, fear and compliance, decision fatigue and cognitive overload, normalization and learned helplessness, psychological manipulation through narratives. That's the media, fragmentation of communities, and erosion of trust. So these are all wonderful topics. Now, they're all deeply, we could do podcasts just on this alone, but I'm going to breeze through these. So trauma and vulnerability. Disasters create a collective state of trauma, confusion, and fear, which can be manipulated to implement drastic changes. So you talk about the shock doctrine theory that Naomi Klein came up with in her book, The Shock Doctrine, The Rise of Disaster Capitalism, argues that crises leave society in a state of shock, making them more susceptible to policies that benefit the powerful at the expense of the vulnerable. And we can look at research in American Psychological Association from 2013 that shows that trauma impacts cognitive functioning. We know that when your amygdala is hijacked, your prefrontal cortex is not thinking logically. You're in a state of shock. That's a medical. We could prove that with science.
Right.
And you're gonna have periods of acute stress. A PTSD. I don't really think it's acute stress. It goes beyond that. You're relying on authority figures. And I think Americans are very used to looking up to mom and dad and kind of Trump daddy. Ew. Fuck that. I know you're not my fucking daddy. Actually, let me tell you how I treated my daddy. I was very skeptical of him.
I do not need a spanking from that man.
No, same.
Anyway, apparently he's the one that likes to be spanked, according to Stormy Daniels. I think we talked about this.
God, I think probably other men too. Anyway,
I'd like to beat the shit out of him.
Yes,
spanking, not so much. Yeah. So, I didn't say that.
So fear and compliance. Fear of further instability fosters compliance with policies framed as necessary for recovery. I think we look at this with 9/11. I think even you can look back in the Cold War. before. We just all were like, all right, we'll take our shoes off. All right, I'll do this. All right, I'll do that.
Yeah.
Or all right, I'll go lean up against a wall because that'll help me in a nuclear attack. That's bullshit.
You know, all right, I'll waive my right to civil liberties, which is, there's an excellent book talking about the compromises that the average person was willing to make following 9/11 because of fear.
What is that book?
I've talked about it in a TikTok. I have to remember.
That sounds like a good one. Okay, I'll remind you to tell me.
Yeah.
Cause I don't, what do I need more? Fucked up documentation.
I know.
To ferment my feelings of why didn't I learn this shit?
Well, it's also hard too. It's like, I want to know. And at the same time, this is, I feel emotionally hijacked and like pissed off all the time. Like, I had a dream last night about Trump.
Oh, he's in your psyche,
and
girl.
I woke up so fucking angry. And in my dream, I was angry. He was insulting the military. Yeah. And which, of course, he's done. And I woke up fucking violently angry. And I'm like, my God, I need an escape. Anyway, please go on.
I had a dream last night that you won an award for like some cancer treatment thing.
Wow. I wish I were that intelligent.
I had a really very, very crazy dreams last night.
Sounds like it. Maybe it was all the wine we drank.
I think it was all the wine and fried food I drank.
We're literally hallucinating. Go on, please.
So, all right. So I can name some studies, Journal of Experimental Psychology, studies that show fear intensifies risk aversion behavior. People often tend to accept solutions rather than prioritize safety over equity. Yeah. You talked about 9/11, fear terrorism, facilitated widespread acceptance of surveillance policies. All right. So let's talk about a couple more that maybe aren't so familiar. Decision fatigue and cognitive overload. I am constantly in a state of decision fatigue. Yeah. Analysis paralysis, right?
Sure.
Crisis overwhelms individuals with stress, reducing their ability to critically assess new policies. So when we're faced with high stakes choices, people default to the path of least resistance, often agreeing to authority-driven solutions. Yes. After Hurricane Katrina, survivors faced disorganized recovery efforts, reducing their capacity to advocate against exploitation, privatization, and public resources. Now, I'm going to go off on a tangent here. I think that's by design. I think, again, that there's not a lot of coincidence here.
No.
This is what they're hoping will happen and create confusion and chaos. Sure. That's basically the whole Trump administration. Yeah. So normalization and learned helplessness, drastic measures implemented during crises often become normalized. And I think that's what we're dealing with right now. And I meant to do a post about this. I will. There's a hyper normalization of what's going on. That's not my term. Prolonged crisis kind of leads to apathy, passivity, and learned helplessness. You might have heard this when you're, I heard this term when I was dealing with parenting and psychology of like, if you're that parent that always ties your kid's shoe, like it's super annoying to have to tie your kid's shoe. Yeah. But, it's annoying to watch them like struggle and all these things. But what you're doing is you're taking that empowerment away from them. You're not giving them the ability to actually struggle in a low stakes environment. Yeah. And then you learn to tie your shoe. Like these aren't big deals. If you're always helping someone, they're not going to learn to do it by themselves. Yeah. It's going to create a lazy, what they call learned helplessness. But, you might call it laziness. Huh. So I think we have a lot of people out there who are feeling that way. So we know that research has shown us that public assets are privatized during crisis and they're rarely restored back to public control. And Seligman's 1972 theory suggests that when people experience repeated crisis without agency, they just stop resisting, creating a fertile ground for this disaster capitalism. Yeah. I think you see that with like Trail of Tears and the Native American population.
Absolutely. And this is deliberate. All of these neoliberals and these conservatives too, who are saying the private industry does it better. They don't necessarily think the private industry does it better, nor are they interested in doing it better. They're interested oftentimes in taking something that government is tasked to do and making it so that they could make money, or that a small amount of people can make money off of it. Yep. And it seldom functions better. In fact, I can't think of a single instance where it has actually functioned better.
Yeah. And I'm going to talk about that later, a situation in Puerto Rico where having the community help out was way better.
Yes.
And the antidote to all these. So I'll go quickly through the last two. Psychological manipulation through narratives that shape the perceptions of crisis and influence public acceptance of exploitative solutions. And I think if you're only looking at one news source, if it's not research-based, if it's not empirically researched, you're not getting the full view.
Yeah.
And again, we can't keep blaming that. You have to, in this day and age, we have access. It's in your fucking palm of your hand.
Yep. No excuses.
Blame shifting. We're watching this happen right now. Vulnerable populations are often scapegoated, deflecting accountability from the systemic issues and preventing collective resistance. That's directly from Klein's book.
Yep.
You're seeing that with the aviation crisis that just happened. God bless these, 65 kids and families who are Americans.
And the military personnel who died in the helicopter.
Yep.
Was a tragic accident. And I'm not saying it doesn't need to be investigated because somebody made a mistake.
But the roots of that came from Trump.
Yes. And at the same time,
I believe
you don't immediately jump to what happened. There's a mistake. People are dead or presumed dead.
And even his whoever coached him on how to say something it makes me, we're all in a really serious danger.
Well, he went and talked to, God, there have been so many mass shootings. I don't even remember which one.
Yeah.
But somebody reported that they could see his notes, and because he was meeting with the families, and his notes said things like, show empathy. Like, if you have to write that down to be reminded that you need to be empathetic,
sociopathic,
right?
Post-it note.
You're sitting, totally. Note to narcissistic self. This isn't about you. It's about dead fucking kids and their families.
Yeah.
How could you? I could not sit there and not be sobbing.
Right?
I could not. I will never forget. Oh God, I'm going to get real fucked up. Sandy Hook really fucked me up.
Yeah.
They all fucked me up, but that one really fucked me up. And I remember Obama, because he was our president, like just busting into Amazing Grace and crying. Like, that's a human being. Even J.D. Vance turning to Tim Walz during their debate, where Tim's talking about how his kid was dealing with a shooter and a lockdown and everything. And Vance actually turned to him and said, that happened. I'm really sorry that happened to your kid, man. Like, even J.D. Vance, whom I think is
pure evil,
a scumbag.
Yeah.
And it was I think I'm a pretty good judge of sincerity. That seemed like a pretty sincere moment to me. Yeah. Trump is 100% incapable of expressing, because he is a true sociopath.
Yes. Yeah. I know. Well, and I think that's what, when you can't trust, I'm equating a lot of what we're seeing in politics to parental figures.
Sure.
And
so are they.
Yeah, I know.
In a really creepy fucking way.
But it's so much that as an American, you're sort of dependent on, there's these things in place that the government has to keep me safe.
Right.
And to keep me healthy and to keep all of us safe. And that's why I used to like being an American.
Right.
That's slowly, opening my eyes to these things. But, we're talking about erosion of trust. And when a child can't trust their parent, that's incredibly traumatic for them, because then that means that inherently, can I trust myself?
Yeah.
And I think that's a beautiful question that Americans should be asking themselves from a really philosophical place of, this isn't conspiracy theory, as Klein points out in our book. And it is obvious. And if you follow the money trail and you ask yourself personally, do I act in a way where I somehow benefit when other people suffer?
Sure.
You have to be able to look at that, not to shame yourself and not to feel sorry for yourself, because that's self-pity, but to go, what can I do differently now?
Right.
Now that I'm aware of this, what are my choices and what's going to be the most powerful that I feel good?
Yeah.
Being a good person.
Right.
But also you have to ask yourself at the polls, do we have leaders who think disasters are bad? Or do we have leaders who are connected to those who make greater profits and the leaders themselves profit or gain? It's not altruistic anymore.
No, it's not. And that's what I'm going to talk about now.
Cool.
It's a great segue.
Thank you. You're welcome.
So in 2017, Klein actually wrote an article about Trump and disaster capitalism. And so, apparently we're living through the worst case of fucking deja vu ever. And so, now we're on to Trump part two. And this is what she said. She said, when I listen to Donald Trump speak with his obvious relish in creating an atmosphere of chaos and destabilization, I often think I've seen this before in those strange moments when portals seem to open up into our collective future. Though Trump breaks the mold in some ways, his shock tactics do follow a script, and one that is familiar from other countries that have had rapid changes imposed under the cover of crisis. The Republicans under Donald Trump are already seizing the atmosphere, and this is 2017, but this could have been written yesterday, of constant crisis that surrounds this presidency to push through as many unpopular pro-corporate policies. And now we're seeing literal racist policies and sexist policies and anti-LGBTQ, specifically trans policies. And we know they would move much further and faster given an even bigger external shock. We know this because senior members of Trump's team have been at the heart of some of the most egregious examples of the shock doctrine in recent memory. So we're going back to 2017 now. We're going to talk about Mike Pence and his role in New Orleans in Katrina. So at the time Katrina hit New Orleans, Pence was chairman of the powerful and highly ideological Republican Study Committee, a caucus of conservative lawmakers. I know, it just sounds creepy. It's another fucking Heritage Foundation. On September 13th, 2005, just 15 days after the levees were breached, and with part of New Orleans still underwater, the RSC convened a fateful meeting at the offices of the Heritage Foundation in D.C. Under Pence's leadership. See how it all comes together, y'all? You see how these same fucking players come together to manipulate our society and exploit the least of us? If you start doing your research, you are going to see the same names and these same organizations keep fucking coming up. We're not making this up. We are not conspiracy theorists. All of this is out there for anybody to read. Okay.
Even I understand it. And I am not.
You're smart. Come on.
I appreciate that, but not with stuff like this. I get confused with the plot of Mystic Pizza.
Well, this is what I'm here to do. To demystify, not pizza, but this. Now I'm hungry. So under Pence's leadership, the group came up with a list of pro-free market ideas for responding to Hurricane Katrina and gas prices. So 32 pseudo-relief policies in all, each one straight out of the disaster capitalism playbook. What stands out is the commitment to wage all-out war on labor standards and the public sphere, which is bitterly ironic because the failure of public infrastructure is what turned Katrina into a human catastrophe in the first place.
Yes.
Also notable is the determination to use any opportunity to strengthen the hand of oil and gas industry. Drill, baby, drill. We're seeing it right now. The list includes recommendations to suspend the obligation for federal contractors to pay a living wage, make the entire affected area a free enterprise zone, and repeal or waive restrictive environmental regulations that hamper rebuilding. In other words, a war on the kind of red tape designed to keep communities safe from harm. Hurricane Katrina turned into a catastrophe in New Orleans because of a combination of extremely heavy weather, possibly linked to climate change, and weak and neglected public infrastructure. Nobody gave a shit because those levees were adjacent to the 9th Ward, the poorest area in New Orleans. The so-called solutions proposed by the group Pence headed at the time were the very things that would inevitably exacerbate climate change and weaken public infrastructure even further. He and his fellow free market asshole travelers were determined, it seems, to do the very things that are guaranteed to lead to more Katrinas in the future, or the fires we're seeing right now.
We're seeing all of that.
Yes.
Right now.
We're going to talk about that right now. We're going to talk about this. This is, so that was the first, just an example. Mike Pence, right? The Heritage Foundation, all of these people and players, not so much Mike Pence, because, he may have wised up to an extent, at least in regard to his relationship to Trump, but he's still a piece of absolute garbage. So we're going to talk about the wildfires in Southern California that have led to various forms of profiteering. And I don't want to hear any motherfucker talking about how it could have been arson. Yes, I understand that maybe one or some of these fires could have been arson.
Geographically, it's not possible, though.
Well, yeah,
that
it's
the same right? Yeah,
yeah. It wouldn't be the same person, right? But even if one of these fires, even if the Palisades fire is arson, the inability to contain it, how dry everything is, how little rain, it all comes from fucking climate change.
No one can start high winds.
No. 100-mile-an-hour winds.
There's no DSM code for what are fire starters again?
Oh, pyromaniacs.
Pyromaniacs. Yeah. It's a wind maniac.
Yeah.
I mentally call the four corners.
I wish I could do
is it
this.
The witches? Did the witches do it?
The woman from The Craft. What was her name? Nancy, the real evil one. She was my favorite one.
Dark magic. We're not into dark magic.
No, not so much. Although I think I could invoke some dark magic against certain individuals who I won't name. Can the FBI come after me for invoking dark magic against... In this day and age, they would probably burn me at the stake.
I think at this point, I hate, it's not even funny anymore.
I know.
Like I can't even, that's how fucked up this is, Jen. You and I don't even enjoy our dark humor anymore.
God damn it. My gallows humor has been robbed from me because
it's going to happen.
I know.
If we don't do something, it's not fucking funny anymore.
Yes, I know.
It's happening.
Yeah. That's what I always say. This shit would be funny if it weren't so fucking scary and didn't have such serious ramifications. And yes, we've gone through dark chapters in our history before, but Carolyn and I will die on this hill that now the fate of the fucking planet is at stake.
Yes.
To the extent that it never has been before.
You cannot take that out.
No.
But you know what I love? What we didn't have, and as I've been watching all these documentaries and stuff, what we never had before is what we have with social media.
Yes. And we have to use it for good.
We have to use it for good.
But look what's happening. Look who's controlling social media. And we're going to do an episode on big tech.
Yeah.
Because of the tech industrial complex. Look at all those fucking assholes lining up to suckle at the teat.
Yeah.
And that coincides with stifling free speech and allowing hate speech to flourish. Yeah. Hate speech is not free speech, y'all. If you're talking... Anyway, that's a whole different fucking episode. We're
very angry today.
We're very fired up.
Very fired up.
This is why I drink. So actually, this is why I use cannabis. Mellows me out.
We're tired because we drank last night.
Totally. It's a vicious circle, y'all. So let's talk about what is happening in Southern California that has led to various forms of profiteering with certain individuals and entities exploiting the crisis for financial gain. So notable instances include predatory real estate practices. In response to reports of unsolicited and undervalued offers for properties in fire-stricken areas, California Governor Gavin Newsom signed an executive order to protect victims from predatory real estate investors. Thank you, Gavin. This order bans such offers in specific Los Angeles areas, including Malibu, Altadena, Pasadena, and Pacific Palisades for 3 months. Violations during the state of emergency could result in fines or imprisonment. Yeah, that's from Business Insider, okay? Price gouging in housing. Landlords in affected regions have been reported to unlawfully increase rents during the crisis, exacerbating the challenges faced by displaced residents seeking temporary accommodations. Such practices violate California's price gouging laws, which prevent rent increases of more than 10% during an emergency. I'm so grateful for where I live. Gambling on disaster outcomes. Platforms like Polymarket have seen users betting on the extent of wildfire spread, effectively turning the disaster into a speculative venture. Isn't that awful?
I've never heard this. Are you fucking kidding me?
Isn't this awful?
What is wrong with people?
So this tends to raise ethical concerns about profiting from human and environmental tragedies.
Wait, they're gambling on how,
Yes, this is from Fortune magazine.
Sport?
Yeah. It's like sports betting. Yeah. Yeah. And who's to stop somebody from potentially influencing it if there's a lot of money on the line, somehow exacerbating
think about that.
The disaster.
Oh, God.
And then also, here we go again with fossil fuels, tax loopholes benefiting fossil fuel companies. An obscure state tax break allows oil and gas companies to avoid paying up to $146 million in annual taxes. These funds could otherwise support wildfire preparedness and response efforts. The persistence of this loophole has been criticized, especially as the state faces budget deficits and cuts are firefighting resources. So bad. That's from Truth Out. So Carolyn, pick one. What psychological strategies can help communities resist or recover from the impacts of disaster? It sounds like you picked that one.
Yeah,
I gave you some options.
You did.
I thought would be good for our listeners. So.
I was going to say too, I was going to add the insurance industry.
Oh,
on
yeah.
your last one too.
Oh, totally.
That's a big one. And they nicked that. Yeah. The other one was, I think I kind of answer that in one question, but I will do more on that. You know, are there heightened risks of PTSD, depression, chronic stress? And basically I'm just going to say death and horrific mental health and physical health. The answer to that is yes.
Totally.
I'm on record for saying I agree that
stress is no good for you.
Bad unless it's good stress. Which is like, oh, I got to get to work on time. We're well beyond that. All right. So this is a really insightful question, Jen, and I'm going to approach it from, I think a lot of people would answer this in a lot of different ways. I'm going to answer this in the humanistic and polyvagal informed perspective.
Like it.
Polyvagal is a science-based theory on how our nervous systems react to stress, but also integrates in bias and judgment and all these privilege and all these other things that impact that as well. So those are my modes of, that's my perspective when I'm working in therapeutically.
Okay.
So let's start by acknowledging the deep impacts that affect disaster capitalism, whether in the form, like you said, the form of privatization, exploitation, profit-driven disaster recovery. Yes, that has absolute impact on making people feel what I think is normal and common. It'd be weird if you would be pretty catatonically destabilized if you weren't feeling like the fact that you are feeling powerless, disconnected, and distrustful of institutions is just a sign that your nervous system's working on point.
And it means I care.
It means you care. Yes. Again, what you do with that, I think, is often where people are struggling right now.
Yes.
So let's talk about resilience and resistance. Communities often develop psychological and social mechanisms to resist disaster capitalism. And that's what we're talking about. The National Hazard Center, it's a website which is from the Institute of Behavioral Science at the University of Colorado from 2020, wrote an article on the impact of unity and strength on the community of Barrio Mariana after the Hurricane Maria in 2017. So this is an example, I mentioned this earlier, of how the ideas and actions of neoliberal capitalism physically, geographically couldn't touch the area because roads were closed and they were completely cut off.
Wow.
So the community came together and self-organized. So for anyone out there who goes, this is pie in the sky thinking this couldn't happen. Yeah. And I think you see this, we're seeing this in what I've been seeing in the social media around the LA fires and around any time a disaster happens. I remember even in the 89 earthquake, seeing what our neighborhood did.
Right.
Did a barbecue. I mean, I ate all of it and was so sick. And like, that's when I vomited and off my parents' bed. And they're like, fuck, we don't have a washing machine.
Oh, no.
Why did you eat all this food?
Oh, my God.
Anyway.
Fun memories with Carolyn. Everything always goes back to your fucked up digestive system.
I know, it really does.
Vomiting or shitting.
That's what my body does. It's like, I'll take it all in and hoard it and then like evacuate. That's how I manage my trauma.
Sweet.
Anyway, so what this, and I'll link the article. I need to still do that, but they established basically the, Barrio Mariana established the health centers. They established health centers to manage medical needs, food, Wi-Fi, electricity. Don't ask me how, but I'll keep going into more research about this. But this is what the articles talked about. Within 5 days, people gave their entire heart and souls to the effort.
Oh,
it was done with respect and collective responsibility. Can I get a fuck yeah?
Yeah.
So here's what are the two things that we see universally that are highlighted in this example. Collective action, which is grassroots movement, and they counter exploitation by fostering solidarity, promoting equity and equitable recovery efforts, and empowerment. Physiological studies psychological studies emphasize the importance of agency and community-led solutions in reducing vulnerability to exploitation. You see this in child raising techniques.
Yeah.
When you raise a child to work together, you see this in play. When children work together and they're building something and they're all happy about it without any adults, without adult supervision, but without the adults being like, oh, let's do this. Let's do this. That's what we're talking about. And we know we know from from observation and research that works.
Yeah. Oh, good. So me laying in my bed and drinking coffee lazily on a Saturday morning while my child and his friend build in the other room and leaving them alone. It's not neglect. It's
not
good
at all
for their psyche.
No, it's good for him.
Yes.
Yeah. And you see this in Reggio Emilia schooling and different, more hands-off type schooling.
Liam was a Montessori kid.
Yeah. You let the people do, with like some guidance and some help. That's what government should be, guidance and support. But anyway, so here are some psychological strategies for resilience, because that's what we're all trying to hear right now. So building social cohesion and community connection. So polyvagal theory emphasizes that the importance of safety in the nervous system. People tend to feel more secure and function better when we're safe. That's just common knowledge. So after disasters, especially those driven by exploitation, one of the most important things for a community to do to restore a sense of belonging and collective safety is to increase social connection. And whether that be, trauma-informed care, and polyvagal theory suggests that collective resilience is rooted in that shared safety. And so whether it's community-based disaster relief models, we have this education and these policies and these rubrics set up. Yeah. This isn't something we're having to make up. So these are the kinds of models that restore a sense of collective empowerment, give people a voice. And that's what makes you heal better. It doesn't mean we're not trying to say, oh, this is great. No, this is awful. Yeah. But we can't sit in a pile of shit. Right. You have to get up and clean it off and do something. Yeah. So creating a narrative of resistance and empowerment. So hope is an essential component of recovery work. Hope, like I said, it doesn't just mean you're passively optimism, but it does get generated through storytelling and reframing the narrative around a community's capacity for collective agency. Yeah. And that sense of agency, when you're feeling that in your nervous system, your autonomic nervous system, you're more likely to physiologically enter a state of calm. And I think a lot of that, humans are social beings. We are groups. We function better when we're working together. That actually makes you have it just makes sense. We need each other. We co-regulate each other. But what worries me is that people are Americans are so individualistic, and we're so lonely, and we're so isolated that we've forgotten that. Yeah. But in smaller community, it's possible. Yes. Let me breeze through some of this. So hope and collective agency, we want these things to be story told in our media. We want them to be shifting from a state of victimhood and strength and solidarity. You see a place like New Orleans, which is and I think even San Francisco and big cities can attest to this. You have such a sense of pride and history. Right. And we're this culture. And or a collection of cultures. Yes. That's the most beautiful thing about places like New Orleans and San Francisco is it's not just one cultural identity. Yeah. It's a multitude of cultures. And that's what makes us so strong. And that's what's created that beauty. And we want that. We like that. Diversity's awesome, guys. Yes. We're stepping away from that. And it's sad because that's boring. So hope and collective agency, I feel like I've talked this to the ground, but it's part of, I don't know that people really, you and I understand what trauma-informed practice means. Right. I don't know if that's part of the normal lexicon that the average person has. I don't think it is. All right. So it's important to address individual trauma that results from the exploitation, disaster capitalism, and I'm going to add just a disaster in and of itself. Yeah. But trauma-informed practices acknowledges that if you're feeling something, that makes sense. Yeah. We're not going to exploit that. And these psychological scars left by the experiences actually provide ways to safely process them. If you're doing that with a trauma-informed specialist. Yeah. What Donald Trump said, not trauma-informed. No, the furthest thing from. Basically, if you have a reaction of well, that felt mean. Yeah, it probably wasn't trauma informed. It's blaming, shaming. You're not talking about the larger systemic issues that are going on. You're blaming people.
Right.
And it's categorically fucked up, even what you're blaming.
I couldn't imagine, like, as a family member or friend of somebody who lost their lives in that plane crash, hearing that.
It was offensive on so many levels. I can't even, it just is offensive on every, but I'll overarch it with just humanly offensive.
Yeah.
So the polyvagal theory suggests that being in a state of what we call ventral safety. So that's I'm socially connected. I'm safe. I'm not having fun, but I'm playful. Right. People feel calm and connected. It's crucial for trauma recovery. This can be facilitated through techniques like somatic therapy, mindfulness, safe, empathetic listening. This is where people in my field, and I think in your field, step in. Yes, we still have work to do, and we still have to make sure you get medical care, food, the infrastructure that comes after a crisis, but it's all given in this trauma-informed way that you're coming in not as a victim, but as a survivor.
And it's community-led.
Yes.
All of the work that I do, and people decry like how long things take in government. It's because we are taking the needs and the voices of stakeholders into consideration before we create policies and programs that are meant to benefit people. If we're not addressing the needs that the community is bringing to our attention and we have our own agenda, we're missing the fucking point.
Absolutely. And, here's why I think this is really hard or unfamiliar. These incidences are intensely traumatic.
Yeah.
And we do go into shutdown and profound grief, some of us more than others. You and I are kind of perfect yins and yangs of that.
Yeah.
I kind of like crawl under a table and don't know what to do and get catatonic. And I need someone like you to kind of go, I got you.
Yeah, totally.
But then you need someone later on, once I feel safe, to be like, hey, I got you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think all of us are witnessing this vicariously. So, we have to have training and education in our communities on eco-socialism and how to prepare for life affirming. I think there already are people doing this. Prepare for life affirming zero carbon responses that actually help people and help our planet, all the while, empowering people and not being so being dependent on infrastructure for the things we need that we do need support with, but also depending on our communities to have access to those things.
Well, look at on my right and on my left, my neighbors are from China. They have expansive gardens in their backyard. They are growing. They have chickens. They're not affected by the price of eggs. This is the self-sufficiency, this carbon pretty much neutral self-sufficiency that is going to make these folks better suited for a disaster than old Whitey over here who doesn't grow any of her own food. You know what I'm saying?
You tried.
I tried.
Well, your Apple Watch isn't going to help you when there's no Wi-Fi. And that's the other thing, that this collective need for all this stuff that we don't need. I think
dependence on technology.
And this is what that capitalist society is keeping us worried. I have to have the next best thing. None of that's going to matter.
No. It's not.
That's not going to matter. You're right. That's my ability to survive and feed and clothe and make sure I'm healthy and safe. And,
that's the example. Next door, collectivist culture.
Yes.
This house, in ruggedly individualistic culture, though we're breaking that mold, obviously.
You have to start because you're seeing it need to happen, and communities can resist and recover from these impacts by fostering what you're talking about: social connections, empowering collective action, reframing our narratives around resilience, integrating trauma-informed practices into recovery, and psychological strategies that not only help heal, but create foundations for rebuilding more than what we're suffering through right now.
Yeah.
It can be better.
It can. It absolutely can. And I know it feels like doom and gloom right now, but there are countermeasures to this. Yeah. And you covered a lot of them from a psychological perspective, but not solely psychological. You covered them from a community perspective, which doesn't hinge solely on psychological stuff and emotions. Like that's empowerment. That's people getting together and taking action and not having their rebuilding or whatever the focus is, rely on some external
corrupt,
entity, or in this case, some corrupt fucking entity or corporation whose sole purpose for being there is to make money off of
your suffering.
By the way,
not help you.
Anyway, we're going to wrap this up, guys. I'm going to be real brief here, but some of the countermeasures, these are easy things to do to an extent, right? Resisting disaster capitalism requires a combination of individual, communities, you said, and systemic actions. Here's strategy. So awareness and education, right? That's super important. So think about what you're reading. Think about the media you're consuming, and think about the money behind that media. If you're reading a publication that, say, Jeff Bezos owns, how transparent is that going to be? Yeah. How critical of neoliberal economic policies is that going to be, right? Okay. Policy advocacy. You can demand transparency, and you can start right here locally. You can go to City Hall any fucking time and contribute by making public comment, like really, and go beyond that too. That's just one small example, right? Support ethical alternatives. What are we doing? What did I do today? I went to a worker-owned cooperative and bought my fucking groceries. And then I went to Costco, who is supporting DEI, and says, and I'm looking at the products after they said that too. I'm walking down the aisles and I'm looking at all these fucking incredible products from Korea, Japan, Africa, India. And I'm like, this is diversity at work right here. And that's exactly what they said. We are providing a better shopping experience for our customers when we're bringing in cool shit from all over the world, which we wouldn't be doing if we didn't have a diversity of opinions here. And they also just tentatively signed a union contract with the Teamsters. So that's the other reason why we went.
Oh, they did?
Yes. Otherwise, we wouldn't have gone.
Oh, score.
Yeah.
I need to do a post about that.
I think yesterday was the deadline or the day before. And I think they hit it. So we're good.
Plus they have amazing hot dogs.
They do. They will fucking kill you, but they're amazing. All right.
Sorry.
Legal action and accountability, file complaints, support legal challenges. Guys, a lot of you have asked me on TikTok, like, what can we do? Can't we sue? Guess what? There are tons of lawsuits every day being filed against the Trump administration. Support the entities that are filing these challenges. Strengthen public infrastructure. Reclaim public services. That is very, very important, even at the local level. Those of us who are public servants have issue with the number of private contracts that exist where we're contending that it could be done by us, right? So there's that. Build psychological and social resilience, as you said. Key examples of resistance are mutual aid networks, grassroots movements like we saw in COVID-19. Let me tell you about the Latino Task Force, which started here in San Francisco during COVID. This was a group of community leaders who came together and did shit. They have hubs. My office supports these. We didn't tell them this is what we're going to do. They came to us and said, we need money to do this stuff. And we said, we got you. That is the job of government. Yeah. And so that's why I'm so stoked to be in that situation here in San Francisco, where we respond to not just the people, but to the most vulnerable members of our society. We take care of to the best of our ability, because it's government. So there are some constraints, which we really try. Yeah. And we listen. So, that's what I'm saying, guys, like public or local shit matters. If you feel hopeless and like you can't affect anything at the federal level right now, just know that shit trickles down to the local, and that is where you can actually see difference. So do that. Okay. So there's public pressure campaigns, activist groups do cool shit, legislative wins. Look at all the legislative wins around, states that have passed anti-price gouging laws or regulations to prevent disaster profiteering. So here's our final thought, because we've been rattling on for, it's not as long as I thought. 52 minutes. I thought we were in like hour 2 or some shit.
It felt longer.
It did. In a good way. In a good way, right? It's just some productive
time passes flies when you're pissed off.
Yeah, it does. And you know what, you guys? Do this. podcast.
Yeah.
Like we now have a small but mighty community of listeners and, TikTok folks, and we're all angry together.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's our job right now to really give people hope.
Yeah.
Like I did a TikTok about the sheer number of lawsuits that were filed against the first Trump administration and that have been fired against this new Trump administration filed.
Well, and that's the power that they, like I said, they didn't have back then, or they had a version of it, but this is something that's never been possible before. And you got to be honest and be willing to learn something and make mistakes and edit things and do all that and be, again, it's not, it is an imperative thing. If you can say something, do.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially
Find
if you're
people.
if you're in a position of privilege, right? Like right now we're seeing ICE raids around the country and, undocumented immigrants are being rounded up. And what are we doing here in San Francisco? We have the public schools who are saying, absolutely not. You are not coming in here. And that's happening around the country too. There's those of us white people, right? If you see some shit on the street,
Say something.
All we got to do is roll up to these motherfuckers and be like, in my busted ass Spanish, tell these folks, don't sign anything. Do these folks have a warrant signed by the judge? If they don't, if it's an ICE warrant, don't go.
Yep.
Don't say anything. And by the way, here's a number for a legal aid place that helps undocumented folks.
And record it.
And post it.
And post it.
Yes, we have that privilege.
Yep.
ICE can't do anything to us.
Yeah.
But they can fuck with our they can fuck with our undocumented neighbors, the majority of whom are peaceful and are financially contributing to our society.
Yeah.
And to the tune of billions of dollars.
Yeah.
And people don't seem to want to recognize that. Anyway, I can go off on this all fucking day. I'm really fired up. So need to go smoke a joint post haste. So final thought here, basically, disaster capitalism preys on chaos, turning human suffering into profit. But disasters don't have to be opportunities for exploitation. They could be moments for solidarity, as Carolyn said, and transformative change. By recognizing these patterns and holding those in power accountable, we can reclaim recovery efforts and prioritize people over profits. Resilience isn't about rebuilding structures. Right. It's about rebuilding systems that serve everyone.
Yeah. And rebuild from the inside out, people. Yeah. You matter. And you may not be my blood brothers and sisters, but if it's just because it's not impacting you, it will at some point.
Yeah.
So now's the time.
Yep.
It's now or never.
Absolutely.
It really is.
Look at what's happening all around us, you guys. It's some scary fucking shit. They being the Trump administration are trying to erase us. Us being women. What are you looking at?
I'm just remembering, do you know the movie First Wives Club?
Yes.
It's actually Ivana Trump who says, don't get mad, get everything. So don't get mad like Jen and I. Get everything you can about, your community resources and start acting.
I love that. No, I think that's beautiful. Look, we tied it back to Trump. She had the common sense to leave that motherfucker. So anyway, you guys, we hope you enjoyed this episode. Our next one is actually going to be about the CIA, Latin America, and immigration, because if you're wondering, even if you are supporting our undocumented brothers and sisters, you may not necessarily know that it was U.S. policies, particularly CIA shit, that contributed to outmigration from Latin America. Oh,
and this is fascinating.
It is fascinating. And we got to talk about NAFTA too when we're talking about Mexico and the impact that NAFTA has had on outmigration from Mexico.
Educate, empower, entertain.
That's what we're here to do, y'all. All right. You can find us on TikTok at twatjc. I think we're on Instagram too at The World According to Jen and Carolyn. Oh no. just listen.
Just listen. Yeah. Send us to your friends. Send us to people you think need to hear this and maybe need a different version of it.
Yes. We all know somebody that needs Jen and Carolyn in their lives.
God help you.
Yeah, right. All right, everybody. We love you. Bye.